perfectly of like the whole team dynamics and understanding key elements to make them successful. And I mean, you guys nail like how to think about key dynamics, but what do you do when it goes bad? How do you handle it? Like you got a rock star, right? Let me give you the scenario.
Okay,
I,
so
I
let
want to
me.
like seek your input on and your guidance and your expertise. Is you have a player on a team who is phenomenal, out of this world, best in class. Just doesn't quite click, right? We've all been on those teams.
Mhm.
What do you do?
Hmm.
Yep. You sit their ass
What if
down
that's
and
not a
tell them to be
choice?
part of the team or they're
Because
off the
there's the
team.
military way to
Like,
do it,
like
and then there's the
be,
there's the
be.
I'm in corporate America
Mm, I,
and I'm not their manager. I'm
no,
not.
I was no, I was a GS14.
So
I
for
had
so Tyler, for
not
the people
directly
who don't
underneath, but
understand
I
what
had
that
a team of
means, can you explain what a
176.
GS14 is?
I had 176. So the government pay system goes 1 through 15. 15 being like equivalent to a colonel. A 14 is like a lieutenant colonel. So it's a pretty high leadership position. So you oversee like the bigger
Mm-hmm.
picture versus like GS12 is like management or supervisory positions. So 14 is a pretty high
I agree,
accolade,
but
I
maybe
guess,
some people didn't
to
or
hang your
might
hat
not
on.
know what a
So
GS14 is or the significance of it. That's why I ask. So what do you do in those situations?
yeah, okay. So like in those situations, you got to do performance. Like if they're not being a team player and they're not playing, you start with the simple thing of, hey, fix the behavior. Then you have to move to, if it's still not fixed, then like even though you're overperforming but you're causing conflict, you try to sit down first and say, come on, dude, be part of the team. Where things get tricky in the GS system is like you have to follow like a code, like you have to write them up. You have to do a performance improvement plan. Then you have to check and do, like it's a long drawn out process. But if they're doing their job duties, but just like the old saying, like 90% of your problem are 10% of your people.
Yeah, I
So
just
we
making
had a
sure I didn't
couple,
transpose that wrong in my head. Yep.
does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. 90% of your problems are 10% of your people. So like I look at this individual as one of those 10%. We had a couple good coaches that were instilling like toxicity in our ranks. And so we had to figure out what we're going to do to solve that problem. And you can't single out a single individual in the government system, which made this more of a drawn out process. So to wrangle people in, we had to treat everybody the same. So we started micromanaging their times. So instead of, I'm very much like, go run, please, like, go do your job. That's why you're hired. Do your job, have fun. I'll put your left and right barriers up. Just go do your job. And they started testing that and yada, yada. So we had to then take this barrier that I put up and had to whoop, squeeze it in for not only just these
Mm-hmm.
individuals, but in a government setting, had to do it for everybody. Had it been corporate America, no, corporate America is at will hire. Corporate America, if you're bucking the system and messing with the team dynamic, even though you're a high performer, you're the one high performer and you're causing the people around you to not want to be there. Like, do I sacrifice one guy versus the 10 other people he's affecting that are, doing just as good? I'd sacrifice the high performer. And some of those, how I talked about the innovation aspect, okay? Like you have the innovators. Sometimes those people are it. Give them their shit to do, let them push it through, and then they'll naturally just sail off to the next
Cory, what do you
adventure,
think?
in my opinion.
I see, yeah, I see things a little different. Again, I'm military, I'm not corporate. Uh, Being a Green Beret, we are supposed to be trainable. Like if they selected you, you are trainable, you're moldable, and you're elite. So this elite performer, this guy that is a high performer, is doing that correct. So what can I do to train him to become the person I need to be or I need on the team, right? So he's proven himself, and he's proven himself on the team to be an elite performer, but he's got a weakness. As a leader, I've
Yeah.
got to try to strengthen that weakness. Now, if it continues to be a problem, you do have counseling, you have other things, but when you kick a guy off a team, it's a direct reflection on the team itself, saying that we were unable to train this guy, unable to make him a better soldier
Yeah, I agree
because
with
of
that.
our own downfalls, essentially.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
we like to push all that,
I agree
build
with
him
both of your
up,
points,
and make
and
him better.
just for the viewers, it doesn't necessarily mean to have to be a guy. It can be a gal. It can be, whatever. It's we I think come from a predispositioned male oriented career field. That's changing, and so using the term male is synonymous with person. And for the sake of my question,
Yeah.
there's no specific individual in my mind. I have a list of questions that I pre-typed out to help narrate this, and I just want to qualify that, because it helps us have thoughtful, meaningful conversations about leadership skills. I love each of your answers because they're both right, depending on the situation, the environment, and the individual that you're talking to. But the thing that's most important is clear, concise communication, right? And not sending a confusing message. And so I think of it this way. And what I've learned, just to add, my perspective to this is, you can only have one command signal go to the person, and it has to be crisp, right? So you can't have a leadership signal come from multiple different angles, right? And so think of like a computer system in the most simplistic form. It doesn't know what to do, and it short circuits if it gets multiple system signals telling it to do multiple prompts at one time. Like it like, I don't know what to do, right? And so it's a binary on or off type thing that processes through my mind. And when you're talking about things and you're setting expectations have to be clear. The team dynamic expectations, roles and responsibilities have to be clear. And when there's tension and there's conflict, the first place to start is just to make sure that people understand their roles, right? Like, hey, and I go back to Tyler, like your point is like, sit them down, like, hey, let's talk about this. Like, let's just like open this up and say, do we understand roles and responsibilities real quick? Let's just do a process check and seek to understand. Tell me what you thought or expected through this, and go from there, and then see where the journey goes and unfolds and highlight it. So, and then from there, you follow the process, and you plug it in, and you bring in external help if you need, whatever that company process is, or the military process, or the GS process is. And that's why those things exist, to give you guidance on how to deal with things when they get outside the boundaries or the buoys, whatever you want to call it.
I think
Yeah.
part of that comes
So
down to a chain of command as well. Like if it was our junior guy, the senior would address him, and it would roll accordingly. If it's a senior guy, the next above him would address him, and it works as a
Yeah,
chain of
it really
command in,
does.
I think, corporate as well as military.
it does. It does. Even in GS. I wanted to touch point
Same
on
way.
this because this is where I failed as a leader. In the aspect at that GS-14 job, right? So we were setting up a brand new organization, never been done before in the DoD. So like typically when you set up a new flight, new group, new whatever, like it's typically you can take a structure, copy,
Yep.
paste, okay, fill in the blanks, and you have the structure. We did the first human performance support group in the DoD, which ties in the human performance line and the medical line, and then ties it with the tactical line, meaning your technical tactical guys or your door kickers or whoever you're supporting, right? And in this process, it was very frustrating because you're trying to set something up, but you need to do this, but that's not the right way to do it. So you need to like go over here to do this. Like it's just like a big ball of intertwined yarn that you have to try to figure out how to unroll. In that process, I also came in, I'm very much like not a micromanager. It's just like, hey, left and right barrier, go. And then as it filtered down, like we're talking about the chain of leadership, they're just like, oh, well, I can just do this. And it's like, I missed the aspect of dialing that in more because of not expecting the people we hired to just kind of take the easy button. So had my decision-making process been tighter, or my policies, my things like that had been tighter, probably would not have had this problem. But also we had faults in our chain of command in the aspect of like who's in charge of who and all that is a kind of a big mess. But I failed in the aspect of giving clear, concise, like policy and direction, just because my personal policy is like, hey, big boy rules, go run left and right barriers, do your job, that's what you're hired to do. And then my second failure was change management. Because we were setting up, there's so much change churning through, and I just like, okay, change. But I didn't put change management in place so people were ready and people were fully understanding. They knew it was coming, but I don't think everybody fully understood what the change meant. So I failed at that too. And I think part of leadership is knowing when you failed. So
because, well, you like never be okay.
Well, I'm
with
not
it, right?
okay
Because
with
it'll
it,
settle for
but
mediocrity, but that's where the richest learnings come from. Is what I'm trying to say is when you broke your tailbone,
Yeah.
like you're like that was a rich learning. Like you didn't see it at the time because it hurt.
no, I did it
Well,
like freaking 2-3 weeks later. We were back out there again. When when Ragbri came through town, remember that? We
You
made
never said
bank
Tyler
that
was the
time.
smartest.
I'm not. Real quick, Ragbri is right across to Iowa, so they do a bike ride all the way. That's just a big party all the way across to Iowa from the Missouri. They start at the
I've
Missouri
never
and they go
done
to
it,
the
but
Mississippi.
it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do want to cover one
So
lesson learned about what
Yeah,
kind of along the lines of what Tyler was talking, but not being afraid to, you know, push the learning off to somebody else.
yeah.
Not really like Heisman it, like this is your problem anymore, but
They
sometimes
absolutely do.
words have meanings, right? Every time. But right? But a good example, a funny story is I was training a guy in skydiving, right? And it's you're jumping out of an airplane for the first time and we're trying to down talk everything we do. So I'm talking to this guy. I'm like, hey, you're on your last attempt. Like, I need you to dive out and arch, which is like putting your hips towards the ground as much as you
Is that like
can
downward
so
dog?
that you make a nice U shape is what I want to see. Uh, yeah, exactly. Like downward dog. Or we say it when diving
And you
into a
like come
swimming
back
pool, in a
up.
shallow swimming pool, you want to kind of
Yeah,
arch
yeah.
so that you don't hit the bottom. Right. So that's another good example. And I've used all those on this guy. And he's like blade running, as we call it. Like he's about to fail. If he doesn't hit this one jump, he's going to fail. And so I look at one of my buddies. This guy had a thick Boston accent. One of my buddies had
Is it
a New
thicker
York accent. I'm like, hey,
than Nick
in your
Lavery's?
best. Good question.
Because his
I
is
have
like
no
Bostonian.
answer for that. Okay. Uh, it wasn't
Okay.
super thick, but it was noticeable. So the New York guy's walking by, and I'm like, hey, in your best Boston accent, tell this guy to arch hard. And he goes, hey, wicked hot arch. Wicked hot arch. This
It's okay.
motherfucker, that jump, sorry if I just swore, but that jump, this guy jumps out and
And he
has
did
a wicked hot arch. Nails it, continues the course, and passes. So just the matter of someone else saying the exact same thing that you've said a different way
It's that
can
third party
lead to a
credibility, and
progression.
it's awesome and
Yep.
it's super frustrating at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's what in strength and conditioning is what we call coaching cues, right? So one thing, like you teach a hip hinge. Hip hinge is like think an RDL. So you're taking you're standing up straight, and then you take your body like this.
Okay,
You
yeah.
run the barbell down your legs, then you pull it back up. So an RDL. Okay, so it's a hip hinge. Typically, people
Yep.
move into a squatting pattern, like think squatting down to poop, poop, whatever. Okay. So I was having issues with this guy. Actually, when I was out in DC is when I discovered this. I was having problems with this guy, and I'm like, hip hinge. And he's an crusty, like guy but he's been there, done that. Like he's, his accolades way exceed, but I'm trying to teach this guy how to hip hinge. And he kept squatting, kept squatting. And I was like, were you ever in high school, or did they have high school back then? And he's like, fuck you. And I'm like, okay, have you ever mooned somebody? And he's like, oh, yeah. So he actually did it. He pulled down his pants. But you know what he did when he did it? He did a hip hinge. He did the appropriate behavior. So as coach,
Yeah.
taking
Right.
your cues, it depends on who you're talking to. And like, would I use that in corporate America? Would I use that? No. But this is an old, crusty veteran, like high level dude that, you can talk to him however,
Straight to
and
the
he doesn't
point.
want you to sugarcoat it, yada, yada, yada. But it connected to him. And he's like, yeah, I know how to moon. And then I was like, hip hinge,
Yahtzee.
Yahtzee,
I remember
there we
playing
go.
Yahtzee with my
And it
grandma.
fixed it right away.
Yep.
We would go to Ida Grove, Iowa. You guys probably know where that's at. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The
Skating
state
rink.
castle. The roll around
The castles, the
Anyway,
castles.
sorry, totally squirreled us on that, but
Yeah.
maybe I'm just trying not to see the visual of somebody giving you the hip hinge. But Grandma and I used to play Yahtzee all the time.